Welcome to the Bonsai Stuff podcast. I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu. As always, I love it that you've joined in again. Thank you very much. This episode, I want to talk about a species that I love, a variety of bonsai that for me is one of the iconic species that is very, very common. Almost everyone has had or has in their collection, and it's the juniper. So many different varieties you can get. I'll break it into two simple sections. You've got needle variety and you've got scale variety. Like Shimpaku, that sort of thing, procumbens on the needle side. But there's lots of different varieties, and some have got a little bit of both. But overall, let's just talk about junipers as a whole in this section of the podcast. And for me, they are one of the best, most iconic species of bonsai. And you look at any photos or images from around the world. And my mind goes straight to Japan, and I think about some of the beautiful trees that you see there, where they've got the dead wood on the trees, and you've got the dead branches, the gins, you've got the dead wood on the trunk, the shari, and that beautiful live vein which has had its bark cleared off, and it's nice and red in contrast to the stark white that they've put the lime sulfur on the dead wood. Then you've got the beautiful lush full pads that are just perfect, like clouds, and you see the beautiful shapes twisting and turning, and some of these trees are exceptionally old, and just to be in the presence of some of these trees is just truly magnificent. So I wanted to dedicate this episode 2 of season 8 of the podcast, to talking about working on junipers. It's a perfect time of year for me to work on my junipers, although you can work on them at almost any time of the year. They're one of those trees that just grows continually throughout the year. But for me, after that spring push they've had, that growth has had a chance to harden off, so I can get in there and start making some inroads, but still have enough in the tank that I can work them quite thoroughly, methodically, and see them bounce back after that. So this is a good time for me to talk about junipers because, hopefully as part of this podcast is a pleasant reminder for things to do at the right time of the year. And for me, I find that junipers are high on my agenda. A couple of reasons, like I said, about the growth hardening off, but also because a lot of my other work has died off. Well, it's sort of died off. There's still plenty to do around the yard, but all that pre-warm weather pruning on deciduous is done. Natives, they still need some work. Some of them, some don't, some do. But I look around the yard, pretty much everything else seems to be in control or where it should be. My black pines, they're all growing their second flush of growth by this stage, so I'm not touching them. I'm leaving them alone. And I look at my junipers and think, yeah, they're at the point where they really need to come back. Frequency of work for me with my junipers is really pretty much once a year on the more mature trees. Some of the younger things around the yard might get it a couple of times, but really I wouldn't encourage you to work on them more than probably three times. I was going to say 4, but I'd really probably limit it to 2 or 3 times throughout the year just to give them time to bounce back. So anyway, I'm going to jump in and start talking about an overview of junipers, and then we'll get into some more of the technical side with the working and stuff like that. So let's go. Okay, an overview on junipers. First up, as I was scribbling down my notes, I went, geez, they're everywhere. They're widely available. And that makes it good because the more available something is, the greater the supply. The greater the supply, the cheaper the prices generally, especially on younger stock, like stock that hasn't been developed yet. Obviously, once it's a beautiful bonsai, doesn't matter if there's a million of them. If it's a nice piece of artwork, then obviously the price goes up accordingly. But at the lower end, when you're starting with a piece of material, being widely available is great because you can pick and choose, look for good genetics with the tree before you buy it. As always, look and make sure that the needle mass or the scale, the foliage is what you'd like. If it seems like it's long and stringy, then pretty much it's going to stay long and stringy, and that's where the different varieties kick in. If you are sort of fresh to the world of bonsai, then I'd strongly suggest having a hunt round through some photos online, looking at trees that you like and think, yeah, that's really what I'd like to, have, not from the design point of view, of course, but the foliage quality, and then dig down a little bit deeper to find out exactly what variety that is, and then hunt for it in your local area, because it pretty much a lot of the stuff that we see online is available in Australia. I think almost all of it is, as far as I'm concerned, but let's say pretty much all of it is. But really have a hunt around. Some of the trees you'll see online too, that it won't be realistic for us to work on in our lifetime because different places around the world they can hunt for them in the wild, collect the yamadori, the wild trees that maybe have got a lot of age to them, a lot of exposed to a lot of elements, a lot of the weather. So we in a controlled environment will never ever get to that. You won't even get close. Carving and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, we can do that with our trees, but to get that real natural, weather-beaten appearance over 300, 400, 500 years, yeah, good luck. It's never going to happen. It might get close, and there's some skilled people around the world that can get very close to it. But for me, it's always seen as something which is manipulated and man-made. So just be careful with your expectations when you do start getting into the online world of checking them. But like I said, they're very common. They're excellent for bonsai. You look at the way that they grow and what we classify in the world of bonsai as being ideal or perfect or a great ambition for us to work towards. Juniper have that. Their growth is nice and compact. It develops pads really well, responds really well to bonsai culture living in a pot. They thrive. They do so well. So, while they're common, I'm not sure that I'd be putting them all into the basket of, I see them all the time, I'm not going to get one. It'd be something that I'd target. And look, being completely honest, hand on heart, for me, the procumbens type of juniper, they don't do it for me. And this is only me. A lot of other people have them and they look fantastic, and I work on a lot of them and I get to see some beautiful ones. But for me, I really love the Shinpaku, the more scale foliage, especially when it's really, really, really nice genetics and good compact foliage. That for me is a real, yep. That's what I want to focus on, and also the more needle variety, like the Femina juniper. I've got a few of those. I love those. I love that stronger needle as opposed to the procumbens. I find that there can be a few issues which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But their foliage compaction that the juniper gets makes them ideal for a variety of sizes. They don't. You look at the size of the needle, size of the foliage on these junipers, and they can be extremely small trees or they can be extremely large trees. They work in so many different designs that it makes them extremely versatile. You talk about the incorporation of deadwood into the design. That's that extra element that other species don't get long term, like deadwood on, say, I don't know, a deciduous, a dead branch on a deciduous, maple or something like that. Yeah, sure, might look nice for a year, 2 years, but 3 years, that's rotten, that's gone. So they sort of tend to incorporate more hollows in deciduous design, whereas with a juniper, we can, know pretty much if that wood's maintained, it can be there for a hell of a long time, like decades and almost forever.
We'll be right back.
DesignerFrenchBulldogs.com offers the highest quality AKC French Bulldog puppies for sale anywhere in the United States. Breeding over 16 years, our AKC French Bulldog breeding program exemplifies the standard for quality, structure, health, and temperament. All of our puppies come with a full genetic health guarantee, and we are proud of our 50 consecutive 5-star reviews within the last 24 months.
I say almost because it's got to be maintained. There's always exceptions to the rule, but pretty much deadwood on a juniper, if it's thick enough and it's maintained, will be there for such a long time that you can really build structure around that deadwood, whether it's a branch or whether it's part of the trunk. It's something that we get to work with in our design concept, and it adds an extra element to it. And for me, that, I asked the question when I was over in Japan, like, I love the look of the deadwood, but beside the deadwood, you're plucking the bark off some of the junipers. Why are you doing that? What's the reason for that? And for them, we don't get it quite as much where I am in Australia, and I'm not sure for every location. I can't speak for everywhere, but they remove the bark a lot on junipers because of borers laying their eggs. And so they can remove it and make sure that there's no environment where the borers get to lay their eggs. That's one reason. The other reason from a design point of view was when you get that stark white contrast with the beautiful, magnificent, beautiful red bark that some of these junipers get, and you've got the lush, vibrant green of the foliage as well. It's the living versus the dead, and it's the combination of the two together from an artistic point of view that creates that perfect harmony, that perfect balance. And I love that. I love the thought of that, we've got an extra element in design that we can incorporate through. And so when I'm working with trees, or whenever you work with a juniper, it's not simply a matter of, removing a branch or whatever. It's like, okay, what other elements can I add to this to improve it? Or over a longer period of time, what can I do? And if you look at some of the design or some of the junipers around the world, where you'll see, half the tree is basically dead, and it's being grown specifically so the branches, the dead branches, get thick enough to have significance. Like if you just remove bark off a fresh little branch, then it's tiny. It's only a couple of mil thick, and that dead wood may get knocked and broken and whatever. But to actually grow a tree, a whole section of a tree, with the thought in the back of your mind that is just purely to be sacrificed off and become deadwood on this tree, as a contrast to the living. Like maybe the left side of the tree is growing to be stripped off and become gins, and the right side of the tree is growing to become the design. It's that sort of that process, and those years and years and years of developing and wiring and shaping something just to know that you're going to remove it and kill it to incorporate into the design of the tree it's fantastic. That's such discipline. That is fantastic. I love it. So from my point of view, they've got that extra element to other trees that I work with in my collection, or I get to have exposure to. So I love them from that point of view. The other is that the climate that these trees can live in is diverse, very diverse. I've travelled all around Australia, and everywhere I've been, I've seen junipers. I was going to say they do tend to struggle in extreme conditions, but that's not necessarily true when they're given the correct care. So extreme heat, put them into a sheltered spot, shade cloth maybe, make sure that they're getting watered appropriately, they're in a mix that suits that environment. With high humidity, then you've got to be careful of fungal issues, so you maybe thin them a little bit differently. Maybe there's different application of different chemicals that you'll use. Too cold, maybe they're sheltered from extremes of extreme cold, just like you would with extreme heat. But all in all, in my environment in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, where I keep mine, is they're fully exposed to all the elements, and I don't have to baby them. I don't have to worry about them, because our extremes, we get, as I've been talking about, we get some extreme heat, but it's only for a short period of time, and then it dissipates. And we get extreme cold, but only for a very short period of time. So it's sort of that ideal environment where it's in the green zone for a lot of different varieties to grow as bonsai and juniper. It's no different. But that diversity of climate means that you can incorporate them almost wherever you are listening to this podcast. And there's different varieties that may grow better in your region than others. So it is really important. Well, I said earlier to find a picture of something that you like. It's really important to ensure that you're not going to introduce a species that just will die or will struggle from day one as soon as it's introduced into your environment. You're better off to go for something that you like, that sort of grows well. Speak to people at your local bonsai club, nurseries, all that sort of stuff, and get the inside word. They might say, oh no, those things don't do very well here because of this fungal issue. But these are more resistant, they're more tolerant, they do exceptionally well, and the foliage is whatever. But I think just doing a bit of homework on them to find out what works. And if you're listening to this going, no, I've had junipers and they've just died, they're no good, stick with it. Just listen to the rest of the podcast about, a bit of the care and how to look after them and what I suggest and what I recommend. But also then maybe do that extra bit of work around with nurseries and that sort of thing, so you can find out maybe if there is a particular variety that's going to tick all your boxes and thrive in your community as well. So they do have, I say this with hesitation, they do have, my experience is if you've got a strong, healthy tree, regardless of it being a juniper or not, they very rarely have a lot of issues. When the trees get weaker, then the issues start to magnify and start to get out of control because the tree's own defense mechanisms go down, right? So with when I was thinking about junipers and this particular podcast, I'm thinking, okay, well, needle varieties, scale varieties, what are the most common things that I see? And juniper scale is one. Little white dots. Almost every single juniper I've ever come across, ever worked on, mine included, or had come through the workshop or been asked advice on, you'll see juniper scale on there. It's not the end of the world. Please don't look at it and go, oh, I've got to spray this thing until it's all gone. Mine, I've got a regular routine that I use with my trees for pests and disease and fungal issues, all that sort of stuff. But I don't look at junipers and see this juniper scale and start to panic. I start to panic when I see a hell of a lot of it, and it starts to be, very, very visible. Normally, when I'm looking at it, I see a few little spots here and there, and go, "That's okay. They're not going to do massive damage." But when I start to see a lot of it, and it sort of flakes off like dandruff off the tree as well, and it's just everywhere, it's like, okay, well, that tree's in a weakened state, so I've got to, as always, I've got to treat the issue, which is the scale. So I'd get into a contact insecticide and try and do my best with that because they are resilient little buggers. But then always come back to the root cause. Why is the tree weakened? Why can't the tree look after itself? Why can't it manage this issue? Why has it got out of control? And that is always something else. That'll be repotting or tie-ins or fertilizing or position or watering or the rain. It could be multiple things that cause it, but it's always stems from that very simple fact that something's happened to the tree. It's got weaker, and then these things get in there and go, beautiful, less defense. Let's get into it. Let's go nuts. This is a perfect environment for us. 2 trees on the bench side by side. One's getting flogged. The other one's okay. There's an issue with one of the trees. It's not your environment. It's nothing to do with it. It's not how you water. It's not how you're feeding, because I presume 2 trees side by side get treated exactly the same. There's something else that you need to dig down on. But so one of the other things that they have issues with is spider mites. Spider mites are very common. A lot of times spider mites gets bandied around for a lot of different reasons with trees that, that's the problem, spider mites. And there are good spider mites, there are bad spider mites, but spider mites sort of in general get lumped all together. Spider mites can be an issue on trees. Normally, as I said, the tree can look after it themselves, and a general maintenance program for pests, from my experience, tends to take care of them. But another thing that I do, especially with my junipers, is factor in that spider mites love that dry environment. They love it when it's super crispy and dry. They love dry bark. They love dry foliage. They love little crevices that they can get into. And so with my junipers, I make sure that when I water my trees every single day, multiple times, whatever it is, I wet the foliage on my junipers, 100%. They're foliar feeders. They take in nutrients and fluids from the foliage, not the same rate as what they do off their root system. But I also find that a massive benefit to that wetting the foliage when I'm watering is that spider mites don't like it. And if they don't like the environment they're in, they won't stay there. They won't persist. They'll move on to another tree where it's a dry environment where they can breed and build their little home and make millions of other spider mite babies. So if I'm providing an environment that says, this place isn't welcome for you, then they'll move on. They won't stay there. So tonight's natural defense mechanism helps the tree, but it also means that they move on. So when talking about the foliage as well, I also look and recommend that you liquid feed through the foliage on your junipers, or when you sea salt that seaweed extract with water. Maybe not sea salt is what it's not called where you're from, but We have it as sea salt in Australia. When I use that on the junipers, I make sure I put it all over the foliage as well. Just gives it a bit of a spring in its step, and it certainly doesn't hurt. So I do that. Now, the other thing that I find a bit of an issue with is tip blight. So a fungal issue that's quite common. And that for me generally becomes more of an issue when the foliage starts to get dense. So at this time of the year when I'm working on my trees, the outside of the foliage looks fantastic, beautiful. It's got nice and thick and dense, especially because I haven't worked on it maybe for 12 months. But when I start pulling that foliage apart, the inner parts are dying because there's not enough light. But also I can see in some of the more shaded areas, tip blight, where just the tip of the foliage, and this is quite common on the scale varieties like the Shimpaku, the tip starts to die off and starts to brush off. Not a massive concern for me. Just, I have a routine fungal spray that I use for my trees, but once you create that openness, you get the foliage mass, so that a lot more light and air can get in there, then generally these issues can be resolved by the tree itself, and you don't need to intervene excessively with the tree. Again, if it becomes something that's out of control, look at why that's happened. Look at the environment the tree's in. Maybe it's a bit too sheltered. Maybe when you're working the pads, you're not opening them up quite as much as what you should be. Whatever it is, just keep hunting with it. If you find it's a routine, regular problem with your juniper that you're always got tip blight, something's happening. So I would make sure that's something I'd focus on. And the last thing before we move on to the next section of the podcast on these beautiful junipers is one of the most important things when it comes to selection of any tree for bonsai for me is its longevity. I want them to live forever. I don't want them just to be, on Earth while I'm here. I want them to be here for the next 30 generations. I want them to be here forever. Possibly to outlast the human race on Earth. I don't know who's going to water it when we're all gone, but and these junipers, they live forever. They have the capacity to live forever. They can live for such a long period of time in the correct environment. Doesn't mean that you can mistreat them. Doesn't mean that you can forget all the basics of what we need to do. But when they get what they need when they need it, these junipers will live for a very, very long period of time. And that's something that when you get into planning mode for these trees, it's not like, okay, what am I going to do over the next 5 years? It's like, what am I going to do over the next 100 years? What am I going to do over the next 500 years? Like, what's the plan for this tree? How does this thing keep evolving and becoming that magnificent bonsai that I know it's got potential to be? It's not just, yeah, sure, get a buzz, achieve a goal short term, but long term, that's where I find them to be a brilliant species for us to use in bonsai. So, all right, let's get into some of the nitty gritties on how to look after them. When I work on any tree, absolutely any tree, but especially and specifically junipers, I've asked myself a really simple question. What's my focus, or what's my goal for this bonsai that's right in front of me? What am I trying to achieve? Before I start cutting, before I get into it, before I start removing foliage and can't put it back on there. So it's really a common thing that I sit down, look at it, draw a breath, maybe have a sip of my coffee, sit back, lean back in my chair, just go, right, what is it that I want to achieve? What's my goal with this tree? And the more underdeveloped they are, the more careful you have to be. The more refined the tree becomes, so that, when it's in those early stages of development, trunk and nabari, you've got to be really careful, because you may be removing sacrifice branches, primary branches, whatever it is. When it gets to the other end and they're more refined, those questions become a bit easier. As long as you're happy with the design that's in front of you and it's sort of where you want the tree to be, then the amount of time I spend sitting on my bum drinking coffee looking at the tree becomes less and less. And so looking to go, yeah, okay, it's a cleanup. All right, so my cleanup is going to be X, Y, Z. Right, okay, let's go, get into it. Whereas when I'm working with maybe raw stock, at the complete other end of the scale, and I look at it, I think, okay, well, what is it that I want to do with this tree? Where do I want this tree to go? That's when you've really got to start getting that plan correct in your mind before you start mucking around with it. All right, so we hear with junipers a lot, and I'd be surprised if you're listening to this podcast 8 seasons deep and you haven't, you've over the last 8 years, you haven't heard about foliage removal guidelines. Never remove on a juniper more than X percent of foliage off the tree. And it's because, I'm going to go around this in a bit of a roundabout way, but the primary reason for that is that by removing foliage off a juniper, it means that its draw mechanism, the ability for the tree to have its strength source, which is the foliage, draw nutrients from the roots, disappears. All right. So when they say don't remove more than 25% of a juniper's foliage in one sitting, it's because possibly the tree is being managed incorrectly. All right. So if you look at the overall foliage mass of the tree and you take off 25%, you can sort of do whatever you want with 25%. You can manhandle a tree and prune it incorrectly or manage its growth incorrectly and sort of still get away with it. There'll be impacts, there'll be side effects somewhere down the track, but the tree will continue to go on and to survive. Thriving is a sort of a questionable thing, but it'll continue to survive with however you want to work on your juniper. Now, not that I endorse it strongly, but there are times where I will remove sort of say 50% of the foliage on a juniper, maybe even a touch more, depending on how strong the tree is. But it's how you do it. All right, so I want you to just knuckle in this thought that comes from working with junipers. The strength of a juniper comes from its new foliage. All right, so when you look at your juniper, you sit down, you listen to this podcast, you're working on juniper and going, yep, right, I'm ready to go. Tell me what to do. Look at the tree and you'll see all over the very tips of the juniper, there's new growth. Those beautiful, nice, lighter coloured tips as opposed to the darker, more olive growth that's the older foliage. The new growth should be right around the whole periphery of the tree. You should see it everywhere. I hear all the time, they're such slow growers. They're not. That's rubbish. They grow from every single tip. When you have a maple, it pushes out one bud and that thing shoots off and you go, God, it's such a fast grower. A juniper grows from every single tip. Like it just pushes out over the whole tree. So they're rapid growers. They're just different. They'll get the odd spear here and there that'll push out to become branches, but they're growing from every single part of the tree, which is great. So when you take into account that, what I said before, that the strength of the juniper comes from its new foliage, when you look over the tree, you go, well, there's new foliage everywhere on this tree. All right. So then to avoid removing that new foliage, but you want to remove some of the foliage, how do you do that without taking off excessive new foliage, which is what the tree draws on for its strength? All right. So the new foliage, and that's to make sure that you're only ever using your scissors and you're not pinching. So when you pinch new foliage, right, and this is the old school way of looking after a juniper, was the way you'd form a nice rounded pad on a juniper would be you'd grab a whack of the foliage in one of your hands and then with the other one you'd pinch off the top of it so it took the shape of your hand that you were doing the pinching on. Beautiful rounded pad, looks lovely, very nice, but what you've removed is every single piece of new growth off that juniper, off that branch. So then you'll end up with all these brown tips. Initially it looks great, looks nice for a photo, but then over a couple of weeks, a month, you'll start seeing all brown tips there, but also that draw mechanism, the strength of the tree suddenly disappears because you've got all the new growth has been taken away. So then the tree needs to muster up the strength, start growing new growth in that area, which takes a long time. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes that branch will end up dying as a result of being pinched excessively where there's no new growth drawing nutrients to that branch. So what you do is you go in and you'll just cut it from the base. So if you're trying to reduce the height of or make the shape of a pad, I'd strongly encourage you not to try and aim for a perfect shaped cloud or whatever shape it is that you're going for. Have it so it's a bit rough, a bit textured. You still can come in and cut down on that on the growth, but you'll be cutting not just at the very tip, follow that branch down and then remove small minor branches across the pad. And then when you're finished, you'll see that there's still that glow of beautiful new tips over the pad, but you've reduced the height down and you haven't been through and pinched every single part of it. So it's pruning junipers and not pinching. And the order that I do this working, I've talked about this a lot too, is I do the underside of the branches. I remove anything growing underneath. I remove anything in the junctions of branches coming out because it takes away the strength of the branch it's growing, but it also tends to open it up. Then the third thing that I'll do with them is come in and I'll start this downward pruning on the pads to try and get the shape that I want to get by not just taking the very tips out, but following those tips back to where there's a small branch and then cutting that small branch. That allows me to reduce it. Then the final thing, very final thing, is to then go through and do my thinning process. So if I look at the pad, and as I was saying earlier, they do get prone to fungal issues, spider mites, juniper scale, all that stuff. That can often happen because the foliage mass is too dense. So in order to open it up, to thin it out a little bit more, I'll go in and I'll say, okay, it's too dense, this pad, push it apart. Okay, I'm going to cut that entire branch out there and then create a bit of a space in there for the light and air to get in there and allow that inner area of the pad to continue to grow. No different from what I would do with any other tree, other than understanding that the new growth on the pads, on the branches, is what I need to focus on leaving. So it's a complex thing to get your head around, saying, well, hang on, I want to cut this back because it's grown too much, but you're saying leave the new growth. You're only cutting parts of the pad out. You're not, if there's 4 sub branches coming off one branch that's growing, I would come in and I'd take 2 of those sub branches off and leave 2 smaller branches there that are slightly shorter, but still have the new growth on the tips. Then that's enough for me to say, well, okay, I've reduced the height down. I've still left some new growth. It's still going to draw nutrients to that branch. That's enough for me. I'm going to stop it there. That's all I would do. But if you get in there and you start thinning before you've done the unders, you've done the junction growth, and you've done that height reduction on the pads, if you started doing the thinning at the start and then you start doing all that other work, you might find that you've removed too much foliage off the tree. And pretty much in most cases on most junipers I've got, once I've done those 3 core things, when I get to the thinning part, it might be the odd part here and there that I have to thin, that I say, well, that's still a little bit too thick. I'm going to get in there and I'm going to open that up a little bit. It's not something that I am going, okay, it's another massive job, lock myself in for another couple of hours. It's just a little bit here, it's a little bit there, it's a little bit there. And I do the hand test where I put my hand on the other side of the pad. And if I can't see my hand through the foliage, then the sunlight can't get through there, which means those inner areas are going to die. That's basically the test that I use to see whether I need to keep thinning the pads back. And when you're pruning too, another tip with junipers, when you're pruning any type of juniper, prune into the green. So if you look from the tip of the new growth back to the where the branch originates from, you'll find on a mature branch or a branch that's been growing for sort of 3 years, let's say, the very tip, the new growth is nice and green. The second year's growth may be sort of olive coloured. The third year's growth, you'll find it's sort of brown with maybe some sharp needles or some of the scales starting to come off. And then the fourth year, you'll find it'll be woody. It'll be brown. So when you're pruning, if you prune into the green section of the branch, then pretty much you're going to expect to get back budding in that area. And this is why you've got to be careful when you are developing pads that you don't let it go too far, because if you have to cut right back into the green, then it's almost guaranteed that that branch will die. So a really safe way to go through and do the maintenance or the pruning work on your junipers is to make sure that you always cut into the green. If you cut into the green, happy days. And you can shorten it back. There doesn't need to be excessive amounts of green there, but you can really start getting that growth to become more compact and spread rather than long and spindly by coming back and cutting into the green section of the foliage. So, there's a few things that I focus on, but it's quite simple. It's quite easy. It's just slightly different to other trees that I work on. For instance, if you've, some of the natives, you can cut back to bare wood and they'll explode with foliage. Same as some deciduous, you can do that and expect it. But you come back to a conifer, juniper, a pine, and cedar cut back to bare wood, chances of back budding is next to zero. Younger trees more likely, older trees far less likely. So it's not something that I encourage or say that you can do that and expect something to happen in closer. So that cutting into the green and getting that budding to occur is great. So the basics are, work out what your plan is before you start. And I'm counting on my fingers here as I say this. Work out what you want to do before you start cutting. Don't pinch your junipers. Cut back into the green. Start with a really basic maintenance program where once you know what you're going to do, start with unders. They've all got to go. Secondly, move on to the junction growth. Third, look at height reduction. Don't aim for that perfect dome pad that looks artificial and gets created by having to pinch the foliage pads. And just make sure that you're not going overboard with foliage removal, and keep the new tips. Focus on how many new tips that you're leaving around the tree, and the tree will continue to take a step forward. So the guidelines for foliage removal, 25%, 30%, yeah, it's a bit hit and miss, but the greater understanding that you've got to take away is the strength comes from the new foliage. Don't remove too much of the new foliage. Focus on what has to be removed at this point in time to make the tree take a step forward in the design, and you'll be right. I seriously love junipers. One of the great, versatile, adaptable varieties for bonsai that are widespread, commonly available. And even though they are commonly available, readily available everywhere, every bonsai nursery I think I've ever been to has had junipers on the benches at all different stages. I find that the design can be really personal. You don't have to follow an image of something that you see online. Like they're great. They're adaptable. So just because you see something, don't get into that mindset that this is what they all look like, so this is what I have to do. That's rubbish. Just design the bonsai to be what you want it to be. As always, as I said, the only thing we're all restricted by is horticultural guidelines. So hopefully I've sort of laid out a few of those in this podcast for you on junipers that make it a bit easier. If you have been unsuccessful with them, maybe don't disregard them completely. Have a look at maybe the management of them and see what you need to change in your environment to get them to go to that next level, and just don't overwork them. That's the thing with junipers I've found, is they really need time to come back from any work you've done. And for me, I expect them to look fantastic and beautiful when I work on them, but then once they start growing, a month or two down the track, they start to get shaggy. I don't put them back on the bench and try and make them look perfect. I really focus on that whole proviso that new foliage is what's making them stronger, and that's what's giving them their oomph. So I'll do with 10 months of not perfect. Well, it's perfect for me, but not a photo worthy appearance, because I know the tree's stronger. And when I consider that these things are going to live for forever, outlast me well and truly, then that's okay. I'm happy with that. So just don't overwork them, and I'm sure they'll be fine. All right, so thank you very much for listening in. Thank you to subscribers. I love you. I really do. And if you're considering supporting the podcast, please do jump on in the show notes. There's a link to become a subscriber from as little as $3 a month. So means a hell of a lot to me and this podcast. So thank you very much. Anyone that has taken that leap of faith with me, and it's 8 years. 8 years we've been together now. I still get messages from people that have recently binged, the last 7 years of podcast, and you must be absolutely sick to death of hearing my monotonous voice droning on about bonsai. But hey, that's what makes the world tick, I suppose. All right, thanks for listening in. I'll see you next week, same time, same bad channel as always. And until next time, happy bonsai.